Now, with any further ado, I think I will introduce our speaker for this evening. Rebecca Walker will be talking to us this evening about Royal Worcester International Exhibition Showstoppers. Rebecca is a collections volunteer at the Museum of Royal Worcester, where she has been researching and writing content for the online Showstopper Trail Gallery. Alongside this, Rebecca curated her own exhibition display, which was entitled International Exhibition Showstoppers within the museum's exhibition hall. Rebecca is a recent master's graduate in decorative art and historic interiors with the University of Buckingham in partnership with the Wallace Collection. She is also on the committee for the English Ceramic Circle as their new membership secretary and an avid member of the FPS's Emerging Scholars Group. So it's such a pleasure to welcome Rebecca here this evening to share her passion and her joy for Royal Worcester and the International Exhibition Showstoppers. Rebecca, over to you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. And thank you especially to the French Porcelain Society for inviting me, and to the Emerging Scholars Group, who are such a supportive group with career endeavours. So if you're not already a member, I applaud you to join. I want to quickly thank Caroline for being a brilliant mentor, for Felix for organising the lecture, and to Patricia Ferguson, whose idea it was for me to have this lecture after actually going to see my exhibition in person in the museum. So thank you, Patricia. So to begin, I just want to give you a background on the project I've been assisting with as collections volunteer at the Museum of Royal Worcester, and where the idea for the exhibition came from. In September 2022, the museum launched its Showstopper Trail, which tells the story of Worcester porcelain through 25 remarkable and significant objects within the museum collection. I had the pleasure of helping to finalise these 25 objects, which was a very difficult task, given that the museum has a rich collection of over 8,000 amazing ceramic objects. The physical trail within the main gallery space in the museum is interactive through QR codes next to each showstopper object, which leads you to an online gallery with more information on the objects, images of related archive material, as well as short 2-minute videos. You can also access this content through the museum's website, which I have kindly asked Felix to share this in the chat with you. In each video, the story of each object is told by Worcester porcelain experts John Sandon, Paul Crane, Philip Serrell, the director of the museum, Sophie Heath, as well as previous artists from the Royal Worcester factory, local sponsors, and a few other volunteers you may recognise from the FPS, who I roped in to be recorded virtually for the videos. The idea behind the trail was to not only engage wider audiences with the museum's collection, but to also welcome businesses, organisations and individuals to sponsor one of these objects to support the work the museum does in preserving and sharing its collection. We are still looking for sponsors, so if you're interested, more information can be found on the website. So the temporary exhibition entitled International Exhibition Showstoppers is in the exhibition hall, which is just off the main gallery route on the ground floor of the museum. The idea behind the exhibition was to create a display which complemented some of the objects within the Showstopper Trail. 6 of these 25 were made by Royal Worcester for the international exhibitions of the latter half of the 19th century. The aim was to then display objects not on permanent display within the museum, to give visitors the chance to view objects that are usually in storage, as well as material from the archive. After much research and exciting trips into the China store and archive, I discovered that there was a wealth of material relating to these international exhibitions, enough to create an exhibition within these few cases. The display follows Worcester's involvement and successes at the international exhibitions in chronological order, from the Great Exhibition of 1851 to the Chicago World Fair in 1893. The story of Royal Worcester in the Great Exhibitions and its growing success begins with this man here on the left, Richard William Binns, the art director at Royal Worcester between 1852 to 1897. In 1850, William Henry Kerr, who had become connected by marriage with the Chamberlain family, was brought over from Dublin to assist Walter Chamberlain and Frederick Lilly in managing the failing Chamberlain & Co. porcelain works in Severn Street, Worcester. In 1851, Chamberlain and Lilly retired, leaving to the appointment of Binns, who was also Irish, as art director of the manufactory. Binns came from a retail background, working previously for Apsley Pellants Glass and China Shop in London, and brought with him an understanding of consumer demand. Kerr was 27 and Binns was 31, and they brought a new energy and investment to Royal Worcester. The factory had been ravaged by fire, and an extensive rebuilding programme took place in the 1850s. New mills, ovens and workshops were introduced, and modern machinery and working methods led to the improvement and quality of productions within every department. Between 1851 and 1887, the Severn Street factory expanded from 70 to 700 employees. In 1852, Binns found the art department to be in a most unsatisfactory condition. He found it necessary to improve this, especially after the Great Exhibition of 1851, which highlighted the manufacturer's deficiencies in design and production compared to other leading ceramic manufacturers. Before his appointment to Worcester, Binns frequently visited the Great Exhibition, and very excitingly, the museum has his season ticket of admission, which you can see in the exhibition. Binns ardently wrote about his visits in his written catalogue of Worcester china between 1852 to 1897. In the introduction, he describes his admiration for the exhibition and his fondness for the remarkable Prince Albert, and includes, in its entirety, the Prince's speech given at the exhibition. In chapter 1, entitled The Awakening, Binns discusses the manufacturer's necessity for revival. He realised the need to revive historical styles through fashionable and unusual designs to meet the requirements of the newly educated and critical public. He was determined to re-establish the factory as a leader amongst competitors and saw the world fairs as key to this. Binns introduced a new training regime, recruited talented apprentices and artists, and greatly expanded the factory's design library of sources, as he noticed there was a lack of artistic knowledge amongst the staff. Binns was ambitious in his plans for what he called a degenerate and almost moribund establishment, which had to be revived and endowed with new vigour, new ideals, and new aims. It is this catalogue by Binns of which I owe a large majority of my research to, and recognition must of course be given to the research conducted by Henry and John Sandon on 19th century Worcester porcelain. So in 1851, Worcester had two porcelain manufacturing businesses, Chamberlain & Co. and Granger, who both exhibited at the Great Exhibition. Granger was a rival factory to Chamberlain, established by Thomas Granger in 1801, who was a former apprentice at Chamberlain. In the 1830s and 40s, Granger embraced the neo-Rococo style, producing a wide range of decorative vases, tea and dessertwares with extravagant shapes, bright, rich colours and scrolled gilding. In 1851, their display was well received for its contemporary designs that combined colourful geometric decoration with organic gilded work inspired by nature. In 1851, the Illustrated Art Journal wrote that from Granger were a series of articles which exhibit a peculiar fancy in design. The decoration of leaves, flowers, and wheat ears is a style of ornamentation for which Granger have a peculiar reputation. The coffee service is a quaint and curious group, designed after the style of the old continental china, but possessing some originalities of its own in the form of its outlines. As a light and elegant service for the boudoir, it possesses attraction. By comparison, the offering of the older firm Chamberlain did not impress. The 1840s were a period of financial difficulty for Chamberlain & Co. After joining forces with their former rivals, Flight Bar & Bar, the factory developed ideas and products to try to meet the increasing demand for novelty and design. A large part of the business was taken up by the production of buttons and porcelain door furniture. However, their efforts were severely restricted by a now old factory and a lack of modern machinery. For the Great Exhibition, they produced breakfast and communion services. which consisted of pierced jugs, bottles, chalice cups and stands. The chalice has two painted oval panels depicting the infant Christ in the stable and Christ with a staff and flag. The comport has a painted centre panel of the Last Supper. Around the base of each object is written biblical scripture related to each subject. The bottle, jug and vase and cover that were displayed in 1851 and now in the V&A represent a finer execution of the reticulated technique. However, as the Illustrated Art Journal notes, the honeycomb pattern is peculiar to this establishment. The old Chamberlain factory did not possess the artists or machinery to compete with the delicate and refined reticulated wares produced by the Sèvres manufactory at the time. Binns wrote that Worcester's standing in 1851 was almost at the bottom of the ladder, and the Worcester factory was never to exhibit again under the name Chamberlain & Co. The Exhibition of Art and Industry in Dublin in 1853 was the first public display of products produced under the new Kerr & Binns partnership. These two Irishmen were determined to make a proud showing for Worcester in Dublin, so with their newly purchased kilns, they decided to launch a new Parian body. Parian had received great attention when first displayed at the Great Exhibition by Minton and Copeland. The result was the creation of the Shakespeare service, a full dessert service in gilded Parian which comprised of a suite of plates and comports for 24 people. The design was inspired by A Midsummer's Night Dream, and the central serving dishes were decorated with characters from the play, modelled by a young Irish sculptor named William Boyton Kirk. To accompany the display in Dublin, an illustrated copy of the play was printed, which contained coloured sketches of each of the modelled characters in the service. The general plan of the service was arranged by Binns himself, and he also had a hand in designing some of the pieces. Worcester's new Parian body, however, was still experimental and proved extremely fragile. The pieces in the collection at the museum, which are on permanent display, exemplify the fragility of the material, as many of them are chipped and cracked. However, the service was a great success and received high praise from critics in 1851. It was praised for the austere beauty of the design and the artistic accuracy of the workmanship. The Morning Post reviewed the service to have a perfection of fairy-like lightness. The Shakespeare service also saw the success of a newly appointed artist to the manufactory, Thomas Bott, who painted the enamel medallions of characters or Shakespeare's on each piece. For the Paris International Exhibition of 1855, Worcester was confident in their fine taste and improving methods, and decided to prepare a number of high-class works. These included some of the first wares decorated by Thomas Bott in painted enamels, as can be seen in the photograph. The potpourri tartar and cover in the centre of the photograph is similar to this one discovered in the museum's storage collection, with painted medallions and arabesque decoration in Raphaelesque colours on a gold ground. These wares were met with public approval. The Art Journal in May 1855 applauded Kerr & Binns for the porcelain decoration, which surpasses all the productions of this class that have been hitherto manufactured in this country. In the collection, we have two medals from the 1855 exhibition, one awarded to Kerr & Binns and the other Thomas Bott. Thomas Bott was also the leading artist in Worcester's display in the 1862 London exhibition. In 1854, R.W. Binns was invited to Buckingham Palace to show Prince Albert specimens of the new invention called Worcester enamels, created by Bott. Bott had discovered how to reproduce medieval Limoges enamels using English bone china. Albert was impressed with the technique, and according to Binns, he proclaimed, "That is the best thing I have ever seen." From this, Albert invited Bott to examine Limoges enamels in the royal collection, after saying to Binns, "Let your artists study the works of the old masters, and when they have become imbued with their spirit, let them design for themselves." Queen Victoria then commissioned a dessert service in the enamel technique, in her favourite turquoise colour. Excitingly, in the archives at Royal Worcester are the original drawings by Bott for the service. The border of the plates and comports were in panels, which alternate between plain painted enamel with pierced and gilded scrolls. On the plain panels, Bott painted designs inspired by the painted decoration by Raphael of the Loggia in the Vatican, designs of which are in the royal collection and would have been shown to Bott by Prince Albert. This royal patronage showcased at the 1862 exhibition became very important for the factory. Bott received a further royal commission to create a marriage gift for Alexandra, Princess of Wales, and the factory now became known as the Worcester Royal Porcelain Company. Again, the company received great praise from critics in 1862, who noted the refined and classic modelling, the delicate colouring and chaste designs. Moving away from the success of Thomas Bott for a year, we come to the 1867 Paris exhibition, of which Worcester's display was described of as limited quantity, but the quality was of first order. The most celebrated piece was this déjeuner or breakfast tea service made as a wedding gift from the city of Worcester to the Earl and Countess of Dudley, which is one of our showstopper objects, on display in the main gallery. The service comprised of a teapot, sugar pot, cream jug and cups and saucers and a platter, which unfortunately today its whereabouts are currently unknown. And if anyone has any information regarding this platter, then please do let me know. The exterior surfaces were entirely gilded and then decorated with a network of droplets of turquoise and gold enamel jewels in geometric lines and perfectly graduated size. These were all applied with precision and uniformity by the skilled hand of gilder Samuel Ranford. According to Binns, a Mr. Barr used to frequently say to the decorators, "We want you to consider this as jewellery," an idea which developed with the firm to the production of actual jewelled porcelain. In the centre of the medallions, painted by leading factory artist In the centre are medallions painted by leading factory artist Thomas Callowhill. These classical female portraits were intended as a tribute to the beauty of the new Countess. Georgina, who was only 18 when she married the 48-year-old Earl, was a renowned Victorian Scottish-born beauty, whose flower-like complexion made her famous throughout Europe. The Earl was one of Royal Worcester's board of directors, and amongst other aristocratic patrons, allowed Royal Worcester artists to have access to their collections of fine art and sculpture. The Earl was so impressed with this service, he ordered a duplicate to be made to show off the factory's skill at their next exhibition. It is this second service made for the 1867 exhibition which the museum now has in their collection. The Illustrated Art Journal noted that the service was covered with jewellery of turquoises so brilliant as to vie with the precious stones themselves. The theme of jewel decoration ran through the Worcester exhibits in 1867, which, according to the journal, was carried to perfection. The other type of jewellery which the art journal refers to appeared on these Henri deux wares, which, on closer inspection, appear like self-adhesive gems you can buy in craft stores today. These pieces were designed and decorated by Edouard Bigot, a French artist who had recently joined the Worcester workshop. These earthenwares are inspired by 16th century French ceramics, Saint-Pourchaire ware. These sculptural, highly decorated objects were praised by critics as successful and most novel, with the addition of imitation jewels as a very happy idea. Here we have a flower holder with a crowned H and a large figure of a boy sat on a pedestal, holding a globe above his head. Also by Bigot is this square jardiniere, and I think the colours, moulded details and applied jewels take away from the paintings on each side by the artist Charles Palmer, who was employed by Binns on a freelance basis. In 1870, Bijot created this mermaid comport in a softer colour palette with moulded masks of Neptune and shells on the base. On the plate is a seated mermaid, again painted in rust by Charles Palmer. In the Royal Worcester archives are original watercolour designs by Bijot, which show his vision of how the applied jewels would have caught the light and complemented the overall design. The execution, I think you'll agree, had a bit of a different result. For the 1871 London exhibition, we return to the excellence of the artist Thomas Bott and the triumph of his Limoges enamels on porcelain. Before joining the Worcester factory in 1853, Bott was an enameller for Richardson's Glassworks in Stourbridge, where he had been an apprentice since the age of 17 in 1846, and exhibited some of his glassworks at the 1851 Great Exhibition. Original 15th century Limoges enamels were painted on metal. For Bott to recreate this aesthetic onto porcelain, he applied layers of Anglais semi-opaque white pigment onto a deep, rich ground of cobalt blue. This built up scenes with a level of detail and depth resembling a carved cameo. Bott exhibited some of his blue Limoges enamels as early as 1855. The Art Journal in May 1855 applauded these wares and the very delicate tone they produced. Another critic wrote, "Mr. Binns was the first in the country to revive the style of the Limoges enamels. Other manufacturers have adopted this style, but rather as imitations, not like Worcester, which is revival without imitation. The examples exhibited amply prove what can be done by intelligent action." The centrepiece to the Worcester display of Bott's Limoges enamels was the Norman Conquest vases, which were created to commemorate the 800th anniversary of the Norman Conquest in 1866. The scenes that encircle the vases are a faithful reproduction of drawings by Daniel Maclise that had been exhibited in Pall Mall in 1859 and later printed in The Story of the Norman Conquest in 1866. Maclise's drawings were based on scenes from the Bayeux Tapestry. The 11th century tapestry went on permanent display in Bayeux in 1842, enabling artists such as Maclise to study the masterpiece. 4 scenes were chosen to decorate the friezes on both vases, one for each side. These depicted Harold's oath of fidelity to William, Harold's coronation as King of England, William's descent on England, and the Battle of Hastings and death of Harold. Special permission was given to use these scenes by the Art Union of London. Scenes from Maclise's drawings were also painted by Bott on this ewer and dish, also exhibited in 1871. The larger panels on the dish depicted the subjects of William informed of Harold's coronation, Harold informed of William's landing, and the Battle of Hastings, and on the smaller panels were portraits of principal subjects. The large frieze on the ewer depicts the betrothal of Harold and Edith. The ewer and dish featured on the front page of the Art Journal catalogue for the International Exhibition of 1871, and sings the praises of Royal Worcester in the first few lines. The royal porcelain works at Worcester have even surpassed their ancient renown, with examples in the manner of the blue and white enamel of Limoges, a class of art in which the establishment stands alone in England. In all respects, design, modelling, colour, gilding, and painting, they will be accepted as among the very best examples of ceramic art. This wonderful illustration from the Illustrated London News shows the variety of shapes that were produced for the 1871 exhibit, and would have been a very striking display of objects with a deep blue ground and lavish gilding. In the centre, you can see one of the Norman Conquest vases with the ewer and dish in front. To the right, you can see one of the 3 civil vases. In Binns' catalogue, they are described as the Raphael shape. The oval panels are painted in full-coloured enamels by Bott and depict three wise Sibyls after paintings by Angelica Kaufmann. Two of these vases, the one on the left and the centre, are in permanent display in the museum, and the third was excitingly discovered for the exhibition. Unfortunately, Bott did not live to see the 1871 exhibition. He died shortly after he had finally finished the Norman Conquest vases in 1870, aged only 41. His illness included signs of lead poisoning, probably hastened by licking his brush to a fine point to achieve the detail of his art. Royal Worcester received much positive comment in the reviews of the 1871 exhibition, noting that since 1851 they had made successful and steady progress, much of which is owed to the artistic endeavours of Thomas Bott. Now, these pieces are not directly linked to the International Exhibition, however, they are fine examples of the legacy of Thomas Bott, and are objects I fell in love with so much that I just couldn't resist showing you. These plaques are decorated by Bott's son, Thomas John Bott, who continued his father's efforts in producing Limoges enamels for Royal Worcester, and these pieces are wonderful examples of how he succeeded. At first, you can see how Bott Jr. continued in the classical style of his father by comparing the tarza on the top left with the sleep and death plaque below. Bott Jr. then developed his Limoges techniques with his own style, depicting beautiful female figures in naturalistic woodlands and playful putty with butterflies, birds, and flowers. In the 1873 exhibition in Vienna, Worcester focused their attention on the Japanese taste, creating an extensive display of different designs inspired by Japan. The showstopper objects from the 1873 exhibition were this pair of ivory porcelain figures named the Japanese Gentleman and Lady. The figures represent the skill and craftsmanship of Worcester artist James Hadley, who became principal modeller for the manufactory in 1870, and was to dominate works produced by Worcester for international exhibitions until the end of the century. Hadley's Japanese Gentleman and Lady combine accurately observed detail of Japanese fabrics, traditional dress, and hairstyles. The pair were decorated by Edouard Bigot and Thomas Callowhill in metallic glazes and gold inspired by Japanese lacquers and bronzes. The figures stand next to Japanese-style tables and vases representing the Western craze for Japanese taste in the latter half of the 19th century. This Japanese craze grew from Japan's first official display in the international exhibitions of 1862 and 1867, after the country had reopened trade with Europe after 100 years of isolation. Prior to 1853, Japan closely controlled external trade to limited foreign influence, concentrating on its own arts and craft traditions. The opening up of direct exchange of goods with Europe in the 1860s was dramatic. Large quantities of imports from lacquer to woodblock prints introduced Japan's distinct aesthetic. R.W. Binns became an avid collector of Japanese wares, avidly purchasing from Japan's displays at the international exhibitions. He made these artworks available to Worcester artists to study, determined that Worcester should become a leader in interpreting this fashionable style. When Binns opened his own museum in 1879 within the expanding Worcester factory, he displayed his Japanese collection amongst historical and contemporary Worcester porcelain. Unfortunately, the collections of bronzes and porcelain from other countries, which amounted to over 10,000 objects, were sold by Royal Worcester soon after the death of Binns in 1900. The Japanese artworks which Binns collected, however, were not intended to be copied by Worcester artists, but adapted, resulting in imaginative designs with a variety of form and decoration. Prior to the 1873 Vienna exhibition, Worcester exhibited a small display of their Japanese wares in the Albert Hall galleries in 1872. The art journal commented upon the display that the art director is never a slavish imitator. He has seen and appreciated the value of Japanese art, and here it is fair to say he has improved where he has borrowed, taking suggestions rather than models. Binns was not only in awe of the design and artistry of the Japanese, but also the craftsmanship. He wrote, "The work is so perfect and so highly finished, and it is this perfection of execution that became one of the chief incentives in the Worcester factory's production." The official report from the 1873 exhibition noted the ivory-like vase and vessels in Japanese taste, which are represented in large numbers. They are throughout good in their original style and independent composition. The material is most charming and the modelling most excellent. The whole exhibition calls forth an exclamation of "wonderful" from the numerous visitors. As you can see in this photograph of the 1873 display, no two objects are in the same form and decoration. Worcester created a myriad of imaginative designs in an expansive colour palette with applied gold and bronze to the decoration. Here in this illustration, you can see a variety of vase shapes amongst our Japanese gentleman and lady, and the smallest object visible is a square teapot with a lizard or dragon handle. The square teapot became a popular Worcester design, and many were created in a variety of ground colours and applied decoration. In the museum archives is this fantastic book of ornamental decorations, filled with designs by Worcester artists in the latter half of the 19th century. Many of the designs represent the variety of shapes and decoration used for the Japanese wares. Here you can see a recurring use of patterns in overlapping circles, Japanese-style trees, bamboo, spiders, butterflies, and cranes in raised gold. There is also a frequent use of blue grounds, imitation bronze mounts, and on this pair of vases you can see a shimmering gold glaze. At the 1873 Vienna exhibition, R.W. Binns achieved one of his goals for the factory. Royal Worcester was awarded the Certificate of Highest Merit, alongside Minton, who had so far reigned supreme in British ceramic wares at all the world fairs. Worcester was applauded for their expansive display of Japan-inspired wares, and critics admired the application of the fashionable Japanese aesthetic, combined with a more European approach to the figure and composition. One critic wrote, "I do not think Minton's utilisation of Eastern art quite so clever, but for the novelty combined with excellence, I think that the royal works of Worcester must stand first. We must all feel glad that a work so renowned as the Worcester factory has taken its legitimate place amongst the chief potters of the world." The 1878 exhibition in Paris, Worcester certainly intended to excel with the potter's vases as the highlight of their display. These showstopper large ivory porcelain vases use the novel idea of making pottery tell its own story. They feature sunken scenes modelled in deep relief by the talented James Hadley, showing the potter at work on ceramic processes of throwing, modelling, decorating, and firing imagined in a 16th century Italian Renaissance workshop. Above these scenes, Hadley placed modelled portrait busts of famous Renaissance artists, either side of the vase necks. The original vases for the 1878 exhibition were gilded with coloured metals by Josiah Davis and were sold on the spot. This second pair of vases, now in the museum, were made for promotional display to showcase Worcester's skills and successes, and were instead decorated in a softer Raphaelesque palette by James Callowhill. The moulded scenes of the potter at work were inspired by two sources. Firstly, they were inspired by the 1877 poem Karamos the Potter by Longfellow, which emphasises the labour, passion, and frustrations of the potter driven by his vision. The factory reprinted the poem alongside images of the vases in a booklet called The Poetry of Pottery, which accompanied the vases at the exhibition to explain the poetic source. Secondly, they were inspired by Cipriano Pilco-Passo's 1557 treatise, The Three Books of the Potter's Art, that explains and illustrates the different stages in the making of maiolica ware in mid-16th century Italy. The treatise became famous and widespread in the 19th century due to the revival of interest in medieval and Renaissance decorative arts. The manuscript was published 3 times between 1857 and 1879, no doubt falling into the hands of R.W. Binns to inspire his artists at Worcester. You can see here how Hadley has taken direct inspiration from the illustrations of the painters and potters. The painter at the back is in the same position as Hadley's model, painting a plate, and the figure in the forefront is positioned in the same angles as the illustration, painting the same shaped vase with handles. And the side profile of this potter is almost a replica of this one, moulding the same shaped vase. And one of my favourite discoveries from the storage in the museum are this pair of pilgrim bottle vases modelled by Hadley. As you can see, the relief decoration of the pottery workers on the front and back are virtually exact copies of the illustrations by Pilco-Passo. You can probably tell I had a lot of fun matching up these images. Also for the exhibition, I found an unpainted glazed copy of the Potter and Modeler vase. Sadly, the portrait heads are missing, but nevertheless, it is a wonderful opportunity to see the skill of the modelling by Hadley before colour is applied. The Potter's vases were a talking point in the exhibition. The French audience was struck with the novelty of idea, as well as the excellence of technique. One report stated, "We must place here highest in rank the productions of the Worcester manufactory. They are distinguished from all others by skill and accurate judgment in the ceramic art, and by great perfection in the execution." The Potter's vases were of course not the only items on display in 1878. Worcester also had a fine display of their increasingly popular Japanese wares. The report continues, "We cannot speak too highly of the charm contained in each of the 1,000 pieces, where the ornament is always in harmony with the object decorated." For their overall display, Worcester was awarded the gold medal, and the art director, R.W. Binns, received the Cross of the Legion of Honour, which I did get very, very excited to find in storage. The 1893 Chicago World Fair surpassed all previous international exhibitions of the age, covering more than 200 acres and welcoming millions of visitors to view 44 nations' manufacturing and technological marvels. Royal Worcester's trade with America had been growing prior to the 1893 show, and the factory's wares were admired and collected by Americans. Royal Worcester was allotted the place of honour within the British exhibits, and the centrepiece of their display was the enormous Seasons vase. Now known as the Chicago vase because of its role that it played in the World Fair, it was the largest vessel ever made by Royal Worcester. Today, the vase is displayed in the entrance to the museum, and it is of course one of our showstopper objects. It measures 4 feet 6 inches high and required 8 men to carry it. It took over a year to produce and required the skills of a team of artists directed by the designer and modeller James Hadley. The clay was pressed into giant moulds by John Finney, the raised pastework was undertaken by Thomas and George Shaw, and the gilding by Josiah Davis. Safely firing this monumental piece many times to build up the painted and gilded decoration was a risky venture. The vase is a true marvel which represents the culmination of skills and techniques developed at the Royal Worcester in the 19th century. The title of the Seasons vase refers to the changing seasons represented in the fine flower painting by Edward Raby around its form. In the archive in the museum has a large collection of watercolours of flowers by Raby. Here are some that I found which are in likeness to the flowers painted on the Seasons vase. To represent the summer and spring, Raby painted roses and chrysanthemums, and you can see coming off these flowers in the watercolours are sprays of smaller flowers, suggesting Raby's thought process of how the flowers would form garlands and curve around the shape of the vase. For the autumn, Raby uses hellebores, ivy and fern, and for the winter is of course holly, and I need to do some more digging to find a watercolour counterpart for this. On this jardiniere that appears to have been designed to complement the season's vase, you can see how the painted flowers by Raby have been gilded over in this basket of flowers in the centre, and on the 4 side panels are cornucopias of flowers. In this photograph of part of Worcester's large display at the Chicago Fair, you can see the jardiniere in the centre, and it's possible that some of these pierced stained ivory dessert plates were displayed within this cabinet on the left. A contemporary account described these wares as chaste and elegant designs in encrusted gold and Pompeian green, with figures and statuettes in stained ivory, jardinières and flower pots. The ceramic jury of the 1893 World Fair applauded Worcester for their artistic character of the designs. The beauty of the coloured gold and bronzes used in the work, the perfect harmony of the colouring, and the quality of the raised gold. A number of figures of considerable beauty and fine modelling are exhibited here. Worcester, however, did not return home with a gold medal or any certificate of highest merit from Chicago. But nevertheless, the honour of being placed centre stage within the British exhibits was still a great triumph for the manufactory. The objects that should have received a gold medal, however, and I think you will agree, were these incredible reticulated wares produced by the artist George Owen. Several vases by Owen were exhibited and can be seen displayed in this cabinet to the right of the so-called Italian style wares, not quite centre stage as they should have been. Owen's vases represented the fine, delicate, reticulated technique he had mastered. In this photograph, you can see the artist at work, piercing tiny holes into the porcelain to create a net-like honeycomb effect. Every hole was cut by hand using an oiled knife when the clay was still leather hard, damp enough to cut but strong enough to hold its shape. Owen would have worked on several objects at a time in rotation. Working on one, then putting it into a wet box, a box covered with damp cloths, to maintain the right consistency in the clay. At first, Owen practiced this technique on double-walled teawares, after those produced in China and the Sèvres manufactory. But he developed the art form to apply it to large vases, creating complex geometric fretwork, and taking months of slow, careful work to pierce thousands of holes by hand on a single piece. This vase in the centre was the largest produced by Owen, with about 5,300 holes. In Henry Sandon's view, this vase was probably one of the most difficult ceramic items ever made. Owen's work was referred to by contemporaries as pierced ivory, as they resembled finely carved ivory vessels from East Asia. The shape of the vases were inspired by Persian metalwork. Through the 1850s and 1860s, there was an increasing enthusiasm for Islamic styles of decoration, catalysed by their representation within the international exhibitions. Owen Jones's Grammar of Ornament, published in 1856, became a direct resource for artists to study alongside the growing collection of objects within private and public collections. R.W. Binns noted that books on Islamic art were bought for his designers, and that they were sent to the South Kensington Museum to study Persian tapestries and exhibits in the Indian court, until they were saturated with the ideas of their exemplars. The result, like the Japanese wares, was inspired designs rather than direct imitation. Looking back at 1851 and comparing the works of Chamberlain and Co. to the work produced by Owen 42 years later, you can see how the Worcester factory had improved, not only in the complexity and delicacy of the reticulated technique, but in the body of the porcelain itself, the design, form, and painted decoration. Binns had achieved his goal in awakening the manufactory. From 1853 to 1893, Binns and his artists received numerous awards and sparkling reviews. And don't forget his Legion of Honour, which I have imposed on the photograph of him here. The Worcester porcelain manufactory had indeed climbed the exhibition ladder from being barely noticed to being placed centre stage. Thank you for listening, and please do email me with questions, comments, or further suggestions. And I do just want to end with a final thank you to the Museum of Royal Worcester, and particularly the Director Sophie Heath and Development Manager Fiona Blake, for this fantastic opportunity to volunteer and to create my own display, and to Joe and Louise, the collections assistants, for their help and encouragement in putting together the exhibition. Please do come and visit the museum. It contains such an important collection, and support for smaller institutions right now, as I'm sure you're all aware, is incredibly important. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you so much. Such amazing objects, and really wonderful to actually take us through the trajectory and how they approached these international exhibitions, and how the design and also the innovation experiments that they're doing to innovate, how that kind of unfolded over the years. Really, really fascinating. We have about 5-10 minutes for questions. I know there are a few already in the chat, but if you have any questions for Rebecca, please feel free to write them into the chat, which is in the bottom right-hand corner, probably, of your screen, and we'll go through those. But absolutely, for me, I think just amazing images. What really struck me from what you were saying is that there seems to still be quite a lot to find in the archives, whether that's the watercolor drawings or the painted flowers or objects themselves. Could you just say a little bit more about your digging into the archives, and maybe what else you think might be there?
Yeah, so I mean, for the watercolors, the flower watercolors, for instance, I mean, there are quite a few boxes just of Edward Raby's flower designs. I've only managed to go through one so far, so there's that digging to do. I mean, there's a lot of research that needs to go into Edward Bijot, I think, because I think he's the French artist that I don't think has been very heavily researched, and he's someone that I'm quite interested in researching for creating those really, really interesting Henri d'Ur wares. And particularly, I think as well that there's a lot of research and archive material on Thomas Bott, Senior, but I'd actually never heard of Thomas Bott Jr. until finding these items in storage, and noticing the date and the signature had a J in it. So that's another artist that I think I want to continue researching. Particularly, I mean, the beauty of the designs. If there's something in the archive that I can find on the direct designs by him, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I feel especially with Bott, those Limoges enamel style pieces are just exquisite. I mean, and just the technical difficulty in getting the enamel color right and perfecting that process must have taken so much time. And then you have this added addition of, someone like Prince Albert actually taking the time to invite him to look at the original Limoges enamels. And you just wonder how many other private collections were they getting to visit to see things. Obviously, you mentioned towards the end that some of the artists quite often were going to the South Kensington, or they had, Owen's kind of Grammar of Ornament or different publications and pattern books to help them in that regard. But I find it really interesting that Bott's actually going to the Royal Collection and looking at these original examples to then not necessarily just replicate or imitate, but be inspired by and really look at the technique as well.
Yeah, definitely. And there's all these Japanese wares as well that were in the original collection. There's that definitely need more research on, and see how they were directly kind of inspired by the artists.
And especially with someone like Bejo, as you say, I think there's a lot more to be said. So to be honest, no better woman. I think you get a head start on that project. That sounds fantastic. We've got quite a few questions that are coming in, so I'll just make a start. We've got Martin Levy, who says, thank you for a fascinating lecture. Martin asks, are there at the museum lists which note the names of buyers at these exhibitions?
Not that I've come across yet. I mean, that's something I would love to find. So I now need to go back into the archive and see if I can find them. But I would definitely announce it and let you know, Martin, if I do find this information. We do have sort of inventoried lists, I mean, particularly for the Chicago exhibition, of the objects that were shipped over to Chicago and the boxes and cases that we were in. But in terms of the buyers, I'm not sure. So hopefully I can find that.
Brilliant, thank you. A question from Preston Fitzgerald, who's, I think pushing you into the 20th century here. Preston is asking, did Royal Worcester exhibit at the St. Louis World's Fair, an exhibition, which is 1904 in Preston's hometown? So he's got a added interest in that.
I don't know, actually. So my research has kind of stopped at 93. I know that they did exhibit in 1900, obviously Paris. They did an amazing display there. But I can do some research for you, definitely, and I can be in touch to let you know what I find for the 1904.
Yeah, I think from very vague memory that the St. Louis one was still fair, like, was a big international affair. So you would expect them to be there, but you know, it's interesting to see what you find. Let me see, we've had so many comments saying, Anne Hayworth saying congratulations and that she thinks the exhibition is superb, so that's lovely to hear. Lindsay McNaughton encourages you to continue and stay tuned for your research on Bejo. She says that her question was going to be about Bejo, so she's excited for your future research on that. Ron Fuchs has said when he did some research into the archives, there were several purchase books from the 1870s that listed retail purchases. So maybe that's a place to sort of start looking, as well as those inventories.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sorry, still some more questions coming in. One from Simon Beher, which you might be able to answer, let's see, which is, you mentioned that tantalizingly a third Sybil vase was discovered for the exhibition. Are you able to tell us where that came from?
So it has been in the museum collection, I think, for a very long time. I think they've always been together as a three, from what I know anyway. I think just the most recent display in the museum for the display case on Thomas Bott, unfortunately, I think they just got split up. There was just not enough room in the display case to have all of the Bott pieces. So one of the three Sybil vases got left out. And obviously I saw it there on the shelf and wanted to welcome it back home by putting it in a case.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So yeah, so it's something that's maybe just shifted over time. Yeah. We've had another question in about the length of the exhibition, and if you're able to say a little bit more about how long it's up for. Can people go and visit?
Yeah, it's still on display. We haven't made plans yet when it's going to be deinstalled. We're still thinking about the next steps to what to put on display. I will share news with the FPS, and I'll put it on socials and everything of when we do plan to end it. But yeah, please do come and see it. And if anybody wants to meet me there as well, feel free to email me and I'll happily show you around.
Have a private tour. Another question through from Cynthia Messenger, who mentions that the photograph that you showed at the Vienna 1873 had objects which showed a blue ground in the two tall vases. Was this blue ground used in several other objects?
So let me go back. Which one was this? This photograph, I'm assuming.
I think it might be the two bigger ones. Perhaps it's not Vienna. It's when with the gold kind of.
Oh, the Bott ones. Yeah. So the majority of the places were the deep blue with the gold. But there was some pieces that were in like more of a turquoisey blue as well, which we do have some more of these pieces on the main display in the exhibition as well. And I know that this one at the bottom here, this is actually in the V&A collection, which I want to go and see.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Yes, oh, Cynthia said it was the turquoise actually that they were thinking about.
Yeah, so the turquoise, I can't remember which ones are in turquoise. I think some of the chalice cups are in turquoise, I think, and one or two of the vases. I can't remember off by heart which ones they were now, but we do have some on permanent display in the museum.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you so much. I think I've managed to get through all of the questions, but if anyone has any more, I think final point to ask. Oh, brilliant. Yes, we've got one final question come through from Stephen King. What was the oxide that was producing the yellow in the teapot? I
don't know. That is something I will have to research and find out. Unfortunately, I haven't got records of that. And I'm sure John Sander will know, so I can ask him as well.
Yeah, it might be recorded. Oh, and sorry, Felix has just sent me another. There was one final question, which had come in from Antoine. And oh, I guess his question is about the materiality of the work. So are all of these objects that you've been showing us bone china, or are some of them works in hard paste?
So I mean, there's a mixture. There's obviously some bow china, but there's Parian works as well. There's also earthenware pieces as well. So yeah, there's quite a variety of different materials that were being produced.
And am I right in saying, Rebecca, in sort of the 1830s and 40s, Worcester, the factories do shift towards bone china more so than hard paste in terms of money and efficiency and various other things? Is that right?
Yeah. So they created essentially what they called the Regent bone china during the Regency period, and then that kind of became like the main sort of body then.
Yeah, I have to say, what I find so interesting about all of this and putting Worcester within this larger global European context of the international exhibitions is, you know, what we think of as something kind of quintessentially British of Worcester porcelain, you know, slightly shifts when you see it in the Vienna context, in Paris, and back again, and then of course in London. And it's been so interesting to see how their style developed over this chunk of time that you've been able to show us, and that the exhibition, you know, demonstrates as well. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. And thank you to all of our listeners. I think we had over 80 people tuning in, which is fantastic. And we're really delighted to continue to offer FPS living room lectures online on Zoom for our members. And as you'll know, all of our members also receive the recordings in due course. So if you're not a member, please do join us. You can find out more information on our Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and as well on our website. So do please get in touch. And Rebecca, thank you so much for showing us all of your hard work. I have to say, for me, it's wonderful to see that you're there, you're at Worcester, and you're working on great stuff in the archives and art objects and putting together exhibitions like this. So thank you for coming to speak with us. And everyone, we'll hope you all have a lovely evening. And once more, thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.